Welcome to UC Today. We have another big UC update show for you. We're fresh off the back of EnterpriseConnect just in the last week. It was announcements galore. I have with me some of our industry experts back again. Let's go around the room. We have Zeus Kerravala. Welcome. Irwin, Lazar, Craig Durr, John Arnold, Dan Root and Evan Kirstel. Everyone, welcome to the show. Hope you're all well. I'm going to throw it over to my co-pilot for today. That's an interesting phrase. We'll get to that later. Mr. Rob Scott, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good, David. Yeah, good. Well, hot on the heels of EnterpriseConnect 2023, one of the best EC events I've ever been to be fair, was absolutely centered around that word Copilot, wasn't it? So anyway, today we're going to discuss four big trends, four hot topics that came out of EnterpriseConnect just last week. And we'll see what our panel of guests have got to say on this. But first of all, I want to talk about the absolute biggest topic that was just dominating all the announcements, all the conversations, and that was AI, artificial intelligence. And I think fueled by the recent kind of release of ChatGPT, we saw a lot of things happening. David, what was kind of top of your list?
Yeah, absolutely, Rob. So there were many announcements. I'm going to focus on the three biggies, if you like, and that was Zoom, RingCentral, and NICE. And they all launched things around AI. Zoom and NICE both announced integrations with OpenAI, which we've seen hit the headlines a lot in the last couple of weeks or couple of months even. Zoom, of course, doing things around their Zoom chat compose. They're doing things around their Zoom IQ email compose and their Zoom IQ meeting summary. So this is really interesting. Obviously, there's a bit of auto response going in there from the email and chat perspective, but we're also seeing those meeting summaries come in as well, which is quite interesting. So does this mean we can all, go into many more meetings? Do we need many more meetings? But Zoom's making it happen with those summaries. So that's quite interesting. RingSense, we saw a tool for sales professionals, so linked with the CRM, integrates all the CRM sort of vendors out there, giving sales professional automated follow-ups after sales meetings and a whole bunch of other features there to help salespeople ultimately sell more. And then NICE has also brought its own AI tool in with Enlighten AI, which is another generative AI tool to help drive new, more accurate customer experiences, and they're linking that to some of their bespoke data around their CX processes. So a lot to go on there. That's not the sum total of all the AI news from EnterpriseConnect. You can catch up with all the other stuff on uctoday.com. But I'm going to throw it over to our esteemed colleagues now. I'm going to start with Irwin. Irwin, what did you take away from the AI news this week at EnterpriseConnect?
Yeah, so there was AI discussion. I must have missed all of it. No, I'm kidding. Echoing what you said, it was almost the ChatGPT conference this year, or GPT OpenAI. Like you recapped, every vendor had an announcement. I think to me one of the surprising things is how quickly vendors recognized that this was the development of OpenAI and ChatGPT was game changing. That they had to have something brought to market so quickly. So, if you were the vendor that sort of looked at it 6 months ago and said, not necessarily a big deal, you were definitely noticeable this year around. And I talked to a couple of companies who said when they first started digging into this last year, they shifted a large percentage of their resources and development into OpenAI because they understood that this really was going to disrupt the market. So, you mentioned in your recap, we're seeing a lot of focus on using AI and specifically ChatGPT-like interfaces as almost a coach. Microsoft had the Copilot announcement that can save you that tediousness of having to take notes in meetings, capture action items, and so on. That's kind of the table stakes. We're seeing a lot of interest in conversational AI in the customer space, using it to search for data. Saw some announcements even before from companies like Slack and Salesforce. So I feel like that was the big area of focus, at least in the go forward. Certainly a lot of discussions that we had with attendees were still more focused on the tactical. How do I support the hybrid workforce that has come into play over the last couple of years and will likely be part of that communication portfolio or how people work going forward?
Yeah, I want to just add on to what Irwin said. I think what I liked about the announcements were that, until this show, most of the AI that we saw from the UC vendors was really about doing a better job in meeting, right? Transcriptions, translation, virtual backgrounds, facial recognition, stuff like that. And what they're starting to work on now is being able to do pre and post meeting better. And frankly, we've always done meetings pretty well, by hook or by crook, but we don't do pre and post meeting well at all. Some companies might have an A-type person that takes notes and diligently and sends it out to everybody and makes sure everybody reviews the meeting minutes, but hardly anybody's, most companies aren't really very good at that. The one cautionary point I will make, though, is that you're really only as good as your data. I had dinner Sunday night with one of Ring's customers and one of the resellers. We were talking about RingSense, and the customer was saying that it looks interesting, but he knows their Salesforce data is not very good. And you talk to most companies, when Salesforce first launched Einstein, it wasn't really all that successful, not because it wasn't a good AI engine, because there's a lot of bad data in Salesforce. And I talked to Mo Kedabith, the CEO of Ring, about this. It's like, it seems like the first thing that something like RingSense could bring is be an input mechanism, right? To be able to actually analyze the call, summarize it, push it back into Salesforce. So when you try and do some kind of sales analytics, you actually got good data, because there is that expression, right? Good data leads to good insights, bad data leads to bad insights. And I'm a little concerned that if we jump the gun too much on all these analytic tools, we don't have the data to back it up, then we're gonna have that Gartner, right, trough of disillusionment. And I think we're likely to see that happen, not because the vendors didn't build good tools, because we don't have the data to support it yet.
Yeah, I'd like to just pick up, echo some of this. So, Irwin, when you said disruptive, I think that's the buzzword for this activity we're seeing. ChatGPT, definitely disruptive, not so sure it's innovative yet. I think what's happening is, as always, the vendors kind of go in lockstep. With one does it, the rest does it. And, once Google and Microsoft are taking the lead on this, everyone has to follow. I think it's going to be a while yet till we see something useful. And Zeus, if the data going in isn't great, you're just not going to be able to trust it. But we're on the right path. So maybe a year from now, we'll build up that track record of better quality data and connecting the dots. And then I could see some more useful innovation there. The other thing, with the meeting summaries, very well hyped, right? But it's not really being done effectively yet. And of course, when it does get good, the problem is no one's going to go to meetings. And we're all going to just wait for the summaries, and then what's going to happen? If no one goes to the meetings, there won't be any summaries to read, right?
No, our avatars you
got to have a little bit of both. And well, that's what we're going to do, right? So we're going to build those little guys, our digital twins. But I think to me, the focus on GPT was kind of all inclusive. But I think the CAI stuff, the conversational AI piece, is more interesting and more impactful right now, because the GPT, the generative stuff, is a whole other use case for AI that I think we're still got a while to go to be useful. But the CAI stuff, I did a session on it, and I know it's in every other session. I think that's where the stuff is happening today that's really much more interesting.
I am a little bit hesitant to be all in on where we're going with AI, only because it seems to be shifting so quickly. I mean, don't get me wrong, we were 18 months ago that we were all talking about how the metaverse was going to be the next wave in a year or so, and we're going to have all these real world applications, and everybody kind of got into it. We've noticed a fair amount of shifting of resources within Meta from the metaverse over to AI over the last few months. So, I think the practical applications of what they're trying to build there are still coming into play. I want to say, I'm hearing a lot of great stuff out of these vendors as they're pushing forward, but there does need to be a little bit of consideration to what is the other side of this conversation. For instance, if I'm able to show that, I'll just say to myself that Dan tends to be negative on this certain type of meeting and it's coming back up in the mood, whether that's sarcasm or really that I'm negative, not really able to decipher that. How is that served back up to a manager? Does that start to impact your culture when you're showing these different, very small, but very big impacts, small within the context of a conversation, but big as far as how the impact may be read for somebody further up the totem pole? I think we still need to work through some of that. I've seen some of the vendors starting to make a coaching sort of interface on the management side and then an employee facing UI as well. And when those things start to diverge, it starts to create that ambiguity where a lot of distrust can come in between the employees and the management. And so I do think that there needs to be some careful consideration on how much is too much versus how much is the right amount to support my team and help them level up as we're applying and rolling out some of this technology.
And let's be clear. I mean, the vast majority of enterprises cannot use ChatGPT in its current form. You cannot have a solution that imagines answers to questions, and increasingly these brands will have to build their own version of GPT based on their own and a proprietary data set. So there was a lot of talk of ChatGPT, but I think the idea of branded or custom GPT based on your own data is what most businesses need, particularly the Fortune 500s. What do you think?
Evan, I agree with you, actually. And I think what was lost in the process was Zoom's version of how they're doing it. So Zoom used the word federated AI. And the way they were making this map out is like you're talking about. There's a large data set that might be generative from the OpenAI, but they're also allowing for the Zoom information as well as their own customer brings in their own information. Now, how these are all blending into a single data lake that can be leveraged, I think we don't know yet. But it was an interesting approach addressing what you were talking about there, which was multiple levels of AI that allow them to customize down to their custom set or their industry or what have you. And I think that is an interesting model to play out and see how that works.
I do think, Dan, I want to revisit some Dan talked about. I do think it's kind of fascinating to see the world we're moving into, where analytics is dominating every aspect of life. After EnterpriseConnect, I went to Tampa and I was talking to the Tampa Lightning CIO, and he says they have RFID every player. They can tell if you skate faster in the first period versus the third period. They can measure time. They can measure everything. I was also talking to the CIO of a casino owner. They can actually measure the rate that dealers deal cards now, and things like that. And literally everything in the world is being analyzed, run through an AI engine, and you get all this data on people's performance. And you're right. I don't know what the ultimate outcome is of this, other than kind of interesting data, but certainly you can see a world where we almost overanalyze and we start making a lot of business decisions maybe based on data that is just data for data's sake, right?
And I think Dan had a really good point in terms of we're right now we're in the excitement hype part of the discussion, right? We haven't really started to think about what the impact is. So you made a point on what that impact might be on how people work and whether or not they have to change their behavior in meetings, or they feel like people are watching every word they say, to Zeus's point about instrumentation. But even as we're now looking at GPT-4 coming out, GPT-6 probably won't be too far off. The impact this is going to have to our industry, how long before GPT can write its own code and put millions of people potentially out of work or change roles of what we do. I think as a society, there was a letter circulated last week that got a lot of attention because Elon Musk signed it that said, hey, let's call a halt on AI development for the next 6 months till we figure out what we're doing here. Obviously, that's not going to happen. But I think that's going to dominate the discussions over the next 6 months. We saw Italy ban ChatGPT. So as we move beyond the coolness and the hype, we're going to get into some real societal issues that I think are going to arise.
Irwin, I have one question probably for Rob and David here. How long before an AI-generated analyst is featured as one of the streams in our monthly meetings here?
I think you might find an AI-generated analyst talking to an AI-generated journalist. So, none of us might not be here in the coming years. So who knows?
And then to John's point, we'll all get the meeting summary afterwards and just read it and never watch the interview to begin with, right?
Yeah.
So, Rob, should we move on to our next topic? What have we got?
Absolutely. Well, next up, I mean, the AI conversation is a nice segue into our next hot topic, which is Microsoft and the fact that they launched since we last met a month ago. They've launched Copilot, and also at EnterpriseConnect last week, they also showed Teams 2.0, or the new Teams versus the Teams Classic, and then kind of showcased all the benefits. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about Microsoft, because they really dominated the show last week. Let's see what everyone's got to say. David, what were your highlights?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously the big launch before EC was around Copilot, which kind of wowed me a little bit. In the demonstration during the announcement, Satya and Adela showed an AI-powered bit of software in the Office suite, creating presentations in PowerPoint, analyzing data in Excel, writing documents in Word, which was all, scary but amazing at the same time. And then, of course, Teams 2.0, the big sort of discussion around that was the sheer speed and the processing power that it now does not take from your machine. It's about half the processing power, which I think anyone who's an avid Teams user will probably welcome that. I've definitely almost broken a few machines due to the Teams effect. So I'm really interested to throw this over to our analysts and see what they thought, see if they managed to get their hands on this software and had a look at Teams 2.0. Craig, should we start with you? What did you think of the Teams announcements last week?
Yeah, they were very, very much dominant in some of the precursor information coming out was taking place. And I'll visit Copilot in a second, but I want to talk about the Teams 2.0. We saw the demo on stage, and I don't want to say it was underwhelming, but I don't think it wowed everyone, but that's okay. The reason why is I don't know if everyone really appreciated what was taking place. So they actually talked about this a couple of months ago, and they showed a preview of 2.0 in their consumer version of Teams. And under the covers, I'm going to get technical for a second, they did two things. They took their UI code and they went from a language called Angular to React. And then they had some business logic also that they changed from Electron to the WebView 2. Now, those are subtle, but there's two things that take place besides that lower processing power. WebView 2 is a Microsoft originated platform, if you will. And they are able now to iterate a lot quicker on that platform than they were dependent on some of the open source idea. So although we saw a fast client, we saw a very clean client, we saw some neat things, be able to switch between domains. I think where the impact's going to really take place is in the future when we're seeing these guys with their feature velocity just go through the roof. Now, coming out of COVID and the pandemic, everyone had huge feature velocities, talking about 400 features in the last 12, whatever time frame it was. This can really, really help set Microsoft apart from their other competitors in terms of their UC client base as well. So that's the thing to watch for going forward. I think we're really going to see the impact of that. Anyone have any feedback about the 2.0 view they saw?
I was just going to say the stuff they walked us through in the pre-brief, though, still shows it's not the cleanest code, right? They brought initial boot time down from 34 seconds to 17 seconds. Those are their own numbers, right? That they show in the pre-brief. To me, that's still the slowest UC client out there. It's even though it's lighter, I mean, we went from this big to this big, right? So it's still a pretty heavy app. And so they do have the luxury of kind of monopoly on their side at the time to office. And, I think I've always said Microsoft knows as much about us in our business lives as Google does in their personal life. So that gives them kind of an inherent data advantage. But it seems to me Teams is still a little clunky. Even the whole way you got to toggle between users. I use Zoom and WebEx and Ring, and I can talk to people from different companies on that without having to log out and log back in and toggle between them. So I still think there's some structural issues with it, but I'm not sure they're not big enough to stop people from using it. That's the thing. So
interesting.
I think Zeus hit the nail on the head in the sense that this was a good improvement on what is currently out there. I think that when you talk about the pervasiveness of Teams across the enterprise, this makes it that much less likely that you're going to try to switch away from Teams, because if it was already good enough for you for internal communications and things, this is of course going to make that slightly better. I would have loved to see more of a focus on stability and some of the, for instance, showing me my cloud version of my image off of my device versus showing me my local image. So I actually know if I'm half cut off the screen on the far end. Little things like that I didn't see really getting filled. Pinning messages. I'm not sure if any of you guys have ever been on a forum before, maybe in the last 25 years on the internet, but some of these things that they were highlighting kind of
That's all
felt
the
like
interoperability problem.
yeah,
That's it.
that
We know.
probably should have already been there. But I do think that where they're headed and the revamp that they're doing really does align with the future facing of exactly Craig's point of picking up the pace, getting more features out that the customers are asking for, leaning further into where the AI is going and being able to bring that really into play in the future. So I think they're setting themselves up very well. But, I do think there's still a few things maybe left on the list from maybe users that use Teams.
But I do think the impact has been felt across the industry, right? 8x8's now leading with CCaaS. Ring has done a lot more in marketing UCaaS. Zoom's come out with their own CCaaS. Even WebEx had heavy CCaaS in their, in their keynote. So I think this is sort of an admission from the industry that Teams, has won. Maybe you can be the number 2 or number 3 vendor in there, but very few vendors are talking about consolidation. They're now saying, hey, everybody's using 2 to 4 vendors. Choose us as your second or third option, right? So I do think that they're far enough down the line, though, that they've reached that de facto standard point.
Oh, okay, yeah. Remember, they made it very clear we are not competing with Microsoft. It's because they cannot compete with Microsoft with Teams. And I think UCaaS is kind of pretty settled at this point. I don't think that the top guys are going to change. And as long as it remains desktop oriented, if for some reason a great UI emerges on the mobile phone and that becomes the standard for everything, Microsoft is going to be that standard for the foreseeable future. Eventually, it will all go mobile, but right now, they're in the driver's seat.
Yeah.
And John, I would bring this back to the first part of the question from David about the Copilot and Copilot AI. I think what that done is continue to create this entrenchment of going from UC workflow to my productivity workflow. Like you guys saw when they originally did I can do an Excel spreadsheet, I can do some other things. And so some of the examples, I don't think they really went in depth. It'd still be determined, but taking meeting notes, taking action items, but turning them into productivity output, such as a PowerPoint presentation, an Excel with some analysis too. So I think that is the 1-2 punch that's going to help in that process is their quick and easy link to productivity activity.
No, I also think Microsoft made a pretty big announcement during that keynote at the end of shifting how they perceive teams within rooms. Because up until this point, BYOD and BYOM have been, from a wireless standpoint, and sorry to throw this onto the schedule here, but I do think it's worth mentioning that has been something Ilya has not wanted to really work with up until this point. And you've seen a pretty big shift in a short period of time to say, you know what, these are rooms that we still need to have within the admin panel. We still need for them to be on the Teams ecosystem. How do we better reconcile those BYOM rooms that are coming into fruition? So I think the Crestron announcement was also a pretty big shift in the overall Microsoft strategy into the market.
Well, as is the WebEx one, right? Being able to run Cisco devices with Teams rooms. I do think it's a little funny though that after all these years we're still celebrating small bits of interoperability, and I do wish that interoperability would get down to an operating system level where you don't have to get things certified by vendors, but you can actually, like, I don't need a certified USB device to work on my laptop, right? It just works, but we're not there yet in this industry. I'm not sure, frankly, we'll ever get there. At least we'll all be retired by the time that happens.
I suppose that's a nice segue into topic number 3, David. Next up, we said we talk about hybrid work. I mean, that topic is not going away anytime soon. Hybrid work is here to stay, but we are seeing a lot of disruption in hybrid work with people going back to work and I suppose what we saw at Enterprise Connect last week, David, was a lot of innovation with devices, room systems, and as you mentioned, Microsoft's BYOD move. There is a lot happening around the hybrid work conversation. David, what did you see at Enterprise Connect last week?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There's so much going on right now. I'm just going to pick out a few things that I sort of saw, particularly from the headset manufacturers, right? So we had EPOS, Poly, and Shocks. So if you don't know Shocks, they're kind of born out of the fitness space with the bone conduction technology. So that's quite an interesting one. Check that out. They're now in the UC space. But actually, it was the research from EPOS that caught my eye. And the sort of the narrative they're putting around the cognitive load, right? So we're all in our meetings all day long, but how many other distractions and noises are sort of coming at us from all directions? And what EPOS are kind of talking about is, our brains are working that little bit harder. People are telling them they're burnt out, they're tired. I'm sure if you're watching at home, you can probably relate. After that day of back-to-back meetings, you kind of get to the end of the day and your brain feels like it's melted. And that's because our brains are working harder. We're picking up on these other notifications. Your boss might be messaging you while you're in a meeting, or you're getting emails coming in and you're looking at that, and your brain's just working that much harder. So what we're seeing in these sort of headsets at the moment is, just what do you block out and what do you let through, that kind of barrier. And this is going to help us from a well-being perspective, I think, but also work more effectively, more productivity, and which is great for everyone, right? So where are we going to take this one?
I do think if it weren't for OpenAI, we would remember EC23 as being the year that we had multi-camera room systems and a lot of different innovation in that area. Now, with that being said, we're making hybrid work easier, right? You saw the Cisco and Poly both have multi-camera rooms where you can spin around and the camera picks you up. You get Chuck Robbins talking about how you got to make the office a magnet, not a mandate. The reality is, though, hybrid work is still a disaster, and it's because companies do not know culturally how to work hybrid work into their organizations. I attended the Zoom breakfast, which was moderated by Gary Sorrentino, their CIO, and they had 15 financial services CIOs in there. Everybody put up their hand. They were interested in hybrid work. Nobody felt they were doing it right. A couple of CIOs there said they built out these collaborative rooms and nobody uses them. And then the next question would be then, of course, well, how collaborative was your workforce before? And they said, well, we didn't really go to conference rooms and work. And so just because this isn't if you build it, they will come. Just because I build out a cool, fancy space doesn't mean workers can go in. I did talk to Snorra Jesbu about this too, and he said, in Oslo, they think about hybrid work being used for innovation, co-creation, or mentoring. And he also, somebody echoed the statement, do not commute to compute, which means if you're going to come in the office and sit on your computer, don't come into the office. And so I think what's missing right now, Dave, is we've got the technology to do it, and we've got the reason to do it, right? Coming out of COVID, people want to work remotely. What we don't really understand are the activities people should come in the office for, the activities that they should stay home for, and how to marry the two. So when I do go into the office, I am using those spaces to do the right activities, and then I have a great experience, and I want to come back to do that again, because more and more, I hear so many stories of people that go in the office, they got 4 people on one floor, everybody picks a corner to go sit at, right? And nobody talks to each other. And that's not the right reason to go in. So, we've got our technology right now is way ahead of where businesses are from a culture standpoint. And I think that's the thing we need to figure out to make hybrid work really work.
And what we've seen in our research is just all over the place. So that there are lots of companies that are trying to force people to come in because they think even if you're working at your desk, you still have that opportunity for building interpersonal relationships, informal collaboration. What we find is the biggest challenge people have with supporting hybrid remote work isn't necessarily technical anymore. It's cultural. So it's how do I get people to feel like they're part of the team if they're at home and the rest of my team is in the office? How do I feel like I'm not being left out? If I'm in the office, how do I make sure that I can communicate effectively with the rest of folks on the team? So I thought, interesting announcements from companies like Zoom with their Huddles app. Walking the floor, I saw a number of companies that are focusing on kind of building these social bonds between people, regardless where they are. I had a list here of companies like Jugo, Jugo, Balta, Bozu was another one that I think was a little more focused on the events. We've seen companies like Rome popping up. So it seems like that's kind of that next area of collaboration, which is how do I create this virtual space that people can hop in, know who's in the office, see who's there, and establish those same kind of connections, whether they're in person or whether they're remote.
Sounds like the metaverse again, coming back, but in a different version.
Yep.
Kind of, yeah, you're right.
Anybody remember Habitat Soundscaping?
Yeah. From Plantronics.
From Plantronics, Poly, right? Anyways, that's a good example of technology that was too soon to market, right? When we talk about needing to make the workspace a more attractive place to come and better than it's at home and all the wellness concerns, well, geez, that idea isn't too far off the mark right now if you really wanted to make that space really good. I didn't see or hear anything at the event about what I would just call third spaces, right? The idea of hybrid work, it seems so binary. You're either in the office or you're at home. But what was it? What was it called? WeWork. Those spaces again too soon to market. But now with all the empty offices and office towers out there, I think there's a real opportunity here for more of that and a lot of innovation. And when you think about all the tech people who've been laid off in the last year, a lot of smart people looking around for ideas. I think this is one of those areas where we could expand that hybrid work concept to other spaces that are better than working at home. I'm sure there's a lot of people who would welcome that, considering, we're lucky living in houses. Not everybody's got that. And you can throw all the headsets and microphones and screen lighting you want at someone, but if their environment at home isn't conducive, crappy bandwidth, whatever, those kind of spaces, I think it's a great opportunity for companies to kind of rethink how they build those cultural connections with employees, right? There's no reason why these big companies can't have these like satellite little offices in these, rental spaces, and they could even customize it for their own. So I think there's a lot there, but I didn't hear anything at the show about that as an idea. But I think the time is right.
John, it's interesting you mentioned that there is a whole category within the commercial real estate area known as gray space. It's the idea that a company had so much space that they're not using, so they downsize it, and they figure out how to create their own WeWorks or sublet it in some ways. They're doing this right now. It's working in certain areas. US is kind of struggling because we already got way too much real estate than we could put bodies in. But I hear that idea taken off in EMEA, so maybe Rob and David might talk about it. And I do want to bring back to one thing that Zeus said in the beginning. I think there's an interesting evolution that's about to take place. We're on the cusp of it. I think people were looking at hybrid work as a corporate initiative when it first came out. Call that hybrid work 1.0. I'm going to have, expand sales in this market. I'm going to launch this product and I'm going to launch hybrid work. And the problem is that there really should be approach hybrid work as a tool, a mechanism to achieve these other goals in its way. Hybrid work to support a DEI initiative, hybrid work to support an ESG initiative. These are levers that you can help move to help support those higher ideas. And I think the key about hybrid work, bringing it back to the office, is you got to remove the friction. I mean, there's some great phrases that Zeus quoted, magnet or mandate. I like the one, don't commute to compute. I'm going to get that on a t-shirt. That one resonated. But what I'm trying to say is it's all about friction, right? Make it so it's easy for me to come in and I'm inspired, whether it be for cultural reasons, productivity reasons, or what have you. So you're right. It's a lot of jumbled mess, but there's a pieces parts there. I think that there's some light at the end of the tunnel potentially.
I would add just one thing, which is, both Zeus kind of touched on this, and then Craig, I know you've done a lot of work on this within your 3 Ws of the workforce, the workflow, and then the workplace over the last couple of years. But the culture and meeting your team where they are is, in my humble opinion, the key to getting hybrid work correct. If you're going to come in and prescribe how hybrid work is going to be done, you're going to get a lot of resistance, and I think you're going to see pretty low occupancy rates around how that policy ends up being pushed down. It really does come to what are my people using on a daily basis? What devices are they really in tune with that they're actually, contacting or connecting with their coworkers on? Don't assume that you know how everybody operates within your company. You really do have to slow it down. I think we've seen that across the enterprise over the last 6 to 8 months of companies saying, okay, I've tested a couple of rooms and a couple different scenarios, but I really need to slow it down and survey my people and really observe how they're operating and then create something that meets them where they are, rather than saying, here are these new rooms with the IT guy is in on Tuesdays and Fridays. So if you're not in the office on those days, you don't get a training, and best of luck, run with the new stuff. That tends to have a fair amount of friction involved with it. But I think if you're really working on, hey, this is how you operate on a daily basis off your personal device. Here's the quick little thing that you already know how to do to share it one way or another. When you're in a shared space, you use that exact same sort of environment or that exact same workflow to really garner buy-in, or at least acceptance of this is how we're going to work moving forward. And we've also seen kind of, a one-size-fits-all policy kind of fall away. And now it becomes much more, each department, each team leader is having a pretty serious conversation with each one of the folks that they're responsible for on what works for them. Do they need to be in 3 days a week, 2 days a week? Do you have a new baby at home? So maybe you want to be in the office for 5 days a week just to get some peace and quiet before you go back to a regular schedule. So it does seem to be something where there's a little bit of a power shift that we're seeing the swing of, where it's not top down anymore. It really needs to be kind of bottom up to be the best fit for the corporate.
Yeah, the primary, why do we all go to Enterprise Connect, right? Because we wanted to engage with one another. So the primary motivator has to be engagement, not interaction, right? So
Exactly.
yeah, there is this kind of a subtle difference there. But that statement's easy to make, but I think the difficulty
Very
is
hard to do.
propagating that down through all the activities the company does, right?
Yeah. Again, I think it's important that there's not a one size fits all. There are people who prefer to come in the office, and they like the banter and sitting at a desk and getting a break from their home. And that idea that, well, we're going to force everybody to stay at home except if they need to come in for a meeting, probably isn't viable for a lot of organizations.
Now, I know we're supposed to be talking about devices. I don't know about you guys, but I did enjoy some of these headsets that I was shown and bestowed upon over the week. The new Poly headphones I tested on my flight home. They seem to be doing really well. I definitely enjoy the little LED screen up on the top of the case for some interaction there. And then also, I was very interested in what Owl Labs brought out with the new front of room bar and the wireless connectivity to the 360 camera in the center of the room. I do think that over-the-air wireless video meshing is one of those things right now that is still innovative, especially at the price points that they're trying to hit. How that necessarily works into an ecosystem of Zoom and Microsoft down the road, I think is still yet to be written. But the idea of, hey, we shouldn't have to core a room or drop network cables everywhere just to have 2 or 3 cameras in the space is definitely a step in the right direction for flexibility.
Yeah, Sonos has been doing that in people's homes for a while, though. So it's really surprised it took that long to get in the office. So
that is very true. Though, does Sonos have the multi-camera aspect of that, Zeus?
Yeah,
I know they have audio.
Yeah, they have
Okay.
audio. Yeah, but still, they've been doing audio for years, right? So
Yeah.
There's an interesting thing happening in that camera space. Zeus brought up about some of the main stage announcements from Cisco with their multi-camera cinematic meetings. Zoom is making more effort on that too. It's a lot of really great technology that's automated, but what those vendors are asking customers to do, especially those multi-cameras that are expensive optical cameras, is to trust AI or automation in their most important meetings in their most important rooms. And it's a stretch. So, you don't want to have your CEO, you don't want to have Chuck Robbins have an automatic camera mess up because of its cinematic meeting. You're going to switch over to a broadcast level control and manage that to make sure of that. So they had this interesting trying to bring the technology down and have the proof points. And I think what's going to take place is 2 things. The low end cameras, like Dan mentioned, Owl with their front of room, center of room, Logitech with their Sight AI is going to kind of come up a little bit from the lower end and create proof points that we can have this automatic camera technology working. Meanwhile, these more high-end camera systems, One Beyond from Crestron also too, are going to start creating the opportunity to have those key rooms used for non-key meetings. Oh, I see it. I trust the technology. Now I can maybe install it in just a large conference room as opposed to my corporate executive boardroom, and then start bringing it down. So it's an interesting technology curve versus adoption curve challenge that's going to take place in that advanced camera space. We'll see how it evolves between now and next year at Enterprise Connect and what people are going to be saying they're doing around cameras.
Okay, so with all the conversation around AI and Microsoft Copilot and hybrid work, we can't escape the topic of security. And that's something that we've seen continued increase in popularity and interest across UC Today and CX Today publications. And we saw a lot at Enterprise Connect last week, didn't we, David? So, I mean, David, what are the highlights and, which vendors kind of stood out for you at Enterprise Connect last week?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I feel this has been something that's been bubbling for a little while now in our market. And I think 2023 is going to be the year, we really see security take a bit more of a central role. We are in a hybrid world, as we all are, all in different locations. Evan's on the move right now. What did I see from a vendor perspective? Some interesting stuff from Theta Lake. And some Mattermost as well, probably the two vendors I saw producing stuff at the show. We're seeing data moving between jurisdictions now. We're seeing different regulatory compliance on those jurisdictions as well. So it's quite interesting how we're going to remain compliant, how we're going to keep our data secure. I think we've seen all of the big platforms being breached at one point or another. Of course, for companies that do get breached, that can come with some pretty hefty fines as well. One of the big problems, I am seeing is that with those technical teams within big companies who might not like their sort of the client that's been given to them, so they might not like the Teams or the Zoom client, they tend to circumvent that with their own kind of tech. And that is where your data can start to go walkabout, if you like. So we're seeing that more and more. I think this is the year people get serious about security. But let's see what our panel thinks. Evan, I don't know if you're there, but hopefully you are. But what are your thoughts on security?
Yeah, I mean, security / data protection / compliance have really come to the fore, and I think there are a few things driving that. One is the banking sector alone in the U.S. was fined $2 billion the last few months for unauthorized application use using things like iMessage and WhatsApp for customer communication. So that $2 billion fine against four banks was a huge shot across the bow. Then we even saw some additional moves by Morgan Stanley actually fining employees, individual managing directors, executives up to $1 million internally for unauthorized use of messaging apps like WhatsApp. So this is no longer, a nice to have in terms of compliance. And people are stepping forward to implement solutions. I saw, in addition to the vendors, you mentioned Theta Lake and Matrix, you see Mattermost with its own approach to compliant messaging. And just a few days ago, a new sort of entrant, Leap Expert, got $22 million in funding, and they allow, banks to implement a kind of compliance strategy around existing messaging apps. So you don't have to, ban iMessage or WhatsApp. They actually have a compliant route for those messaging apps, and they're doing a lot of work with Microsoft as a channel. So it's a huge challenge. It's a huge opportunity for these new vendors. And it's going to start, of course, in banking. It's going to work its way through healthcare, compliance, and really most industries, when you think about it, have this data protection problem. So, what say you?
I'll just jump in real quick. This is another area that's come up a lot in our research. It's, we talked about AI and all of the data that's now being generated, meeting transcripts, meeting notes, meeting assessments that may come out of it. Where does all this data live? Who has access to it? How long do I need to retain it? Where do I need to store it? Whether that's in Europe under GDPR rules potentially, or in the US for a certain period of time to meet certain regulations, whether it's healthcare, like Evan talked about, or financial services. So yeah, it was definitely telling that when you looked at the best of Enterprise Connect, a compliance vendor was one of the top providers, or tied for the overall award. So, and as Evan mentioned, also we're seeing interest in companies like the Leap Expert, and we're seeing a big rise in organizations that are trying to attack all these different new ways that we have to communicate, collaborate, create content, share data, and how do we make sure that we're doing so in a compliant fashion, depending on what our regulatory requirements
the hard part of UC security, though, is like I've talked to Eric about it and why there aren't more sessions, and he says because they aren't very well attended and also not very well understood. And so, when back in the pandemic, when Zoom bombing, was really a thing, there was a whole lot of attention given to security, right? And then everybody beefed up to security, everybody has encryption. But then when you get down to actual RFPs, there's not a lot of granularity around what exactly encryption is. Is it data, is it in flight, is it voice, is it end-to-end or whatever? And so most vendors can check a box, and that frustrates the vendors that have put more effort into their security than other ones. And at the end of the day, we have this situation where I think from a vendor perspective, we're kind of outpacing what buyers understand, right? And I think there's most vendors can sort of check the high level boxes on compliance, and I don't see many RFPs that kind of drill down a level. And so I think there is still quite a big gap between the capabilities that are there from the leading vendors and actually what customers are using to make decisions. So we'll see, if that changes from here with work from home and some of the other regulatory changes. But this has been an ongoing discussion for a long time.
Yeah. The dots have not been well connected yet. I still think UC as a category is pretty much done at this point. But when you talk about the Theta Lakes of the world, we're going to see, because of digital transformation that, the pandemic has kind of accelerated, more and more of our communications have become digital. And again, this is where the speech tech, the CAI stuff comes in, because, all of the conversations we've had up to date have just been kind of like Clubhouse. They come, they go, there's no record. But now these devices are listening to everything, recording everything. So there's going to be a huge, groundswell of all this data based on our conversations that we've never had before. And it's all coming, a lot of it's going to be flowing through the UCaaS platforms. And so I'm with you guys, they don't know what to do with it. And so it's going to be a real challenge. And I think we're going to see another category rise very quickly around what I would call data archiving, where, the compliance stuff is the front end, like what comes through your communications that has to meet all the regulatory requirements. But at the back end, all the stuff that lives in the cloud and, whether it's private cloud, public cloud, all of this data, we didn't have this 2 or 3 years ago. And there's going to be a need to archive it because it's somehow you've got to keep track of it. Financial sector has big, rules and regs around how long all these things have to be not just archived, but kept in a mode that is not editable, right? It's got to be read only. And there's so many, holes where these things can fall through if you don't have good policies in place to protect your data, because it can very easily be edited, manipulated by outside parties. Anyone gets into your system, and that could just really throw everything out of whack. So I think that compliance thing, is going to lead to a bigger issue. And Evan, I'm glad you mentioned some of the other things around security, because we didn't really even touch on privacy implications. Companies like Journey.ai were there. I spoke with them, and that's a whole other layer to this. It's like insurance. No one wants to talk about it, right? But it's there. It's complicated, but someone's got to own it. So I think that's another area, sure, that this show could be spending more time on.
John, I think the privacy implications on a personal or across the employee base are something that it's obviously a pendulum, and just like with any kind of security or privacy situation, there's arguments on both sides. But you do need to be careful that you're not stifling innovation by trying to have so much awareness of what's going on that you end up creating that natural tendency of, I'm not going to talk. I'm not going to share across platforms or talk on communications because I don't know what's being listened to and I don't know how someone else is going to perceive it. So I do think that there's some bigger hurdles for us to talk about down over the next 12 to 18 months on, how much of what's on my personal device should be exposed to my employer, how many of the different chat apps that I may have a user tag on or may have a profile on are privy or are available to my employer to have for review. I think all those things are going to come more and more into play. So I'd love to see EC lean more into that and tackle it head on versus kind of waiting for the wake to be created and then decide, was this good or bad?
Unfortunately, that is all we've got time for. I'd like to thank our guests for joining us today. Zeus, Irwin, Craig, John, Dan, and Evan, and my co-pilot, shall we say, Rob. Thank you so much for joining me, and I look forward to the next one.